What up, everyone? My name is Ray, and this is my channel Runaway Ray, where I talk a little bit about my life as an ex-Christian and ex-homeschooler slash missionary, as well as some of my current experiences as a registered nurse and just different life adventures. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experiences as specifically a homeschool kid, and just kind of wanted to share some of my thoughts and how I feel like that lifestyle has affected me personally. Before I really dig into that whole story, though, I always like to kind of preface these types of conversations by saying that I understand everyone's experiences are different. Some people have loved being a homeschool kid. Some people think it's the best thing in the world for them. And some people don't. Some people don't enjoy it. They find it to be isolating and lonely. There's a whole spectrum. And so my video here today is not meant to be like, you shouldn't ever homeschool your kid, or really give any kind of perspective like that, because there's lots of different reasons that people choose to do what they do with their child's education. I just want to share my own personal story and how I feel it's affected me, and maybe some of my concerns with the homeschooling community at large. But please don't take this personal. If you enjoy your homeschooling life, then just disregard this as one story, right? But I'll kind of give you my little tale here, and then get into some of the ramifications I think on my life. So I was homeschooled my entire life. I never went to any kind of public or private school, really didn't socialize with a lot of kids. In the earlier years of my homeschool experience, it was a little bit better because we lived in a town in Indiana that was pretty well populated, and there was a pretty thriving homeschool community there. So I was able to be involved in what we call homeschool co-ops. If you don't know what homeschool co-ops are, they all look a little bit different, but typically it's some kind of group where families get together and parents kind of divvy up tasks and teach different little classes, like how to bake or sew, or maybe like a geography class or something like that if they've got that skill set. And then the kids can kind of break up and go into these different classes together. It's kind of like a simulated school experience. And those were really fun times for me because I got to be with my group of, at that time, friends, got to learn different things from different people and kind of rub shoulders with people other than my parents and my brother. However, when I was around 12 or 13, my parents decided rather abruptly to move across the country. We had about 2 weeks to pack up, and they sold our house, and we were homeless then for several months. Now, my family is not the only family that's done this kind of thing. I've actually known a few different homeschool families that thought it would be great to give their kids the experience of traveling, being on the road, having getting to see different places, and in some ways that was a really fun experience. I kind of disagree a little bit with how my parents approached it, in the sense that it was very abrupt and I didn't really have a chance to say goodbye to most of my homeschool community in that town in Indiana before we just left. So we were living in our car for several months. During that time, my schoolwork definitely suffered. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to study algebra while you are in a moving vehicle with a dog and 2 screaming kids other than yourself, plus 2 grumpy parents. Not ever getting a good night's sleep because we were camping in tents and it was very uncomfortable and kind of cold. Yeah, those months were not schooling months for me. I read a lot of Lord of the Rings and just tried to get by. And then we settled in South Dakota in kind of a rural location, where I then tried to pick back up with my schooling. And that's really where things, I felt, kind of started to spiral for me personally, because in South Dakota, there was not the thriving homeschool community that we had in Indiana. There was still a homeschool co-op I was able to get involved with a little bit, but None of the kids were like my age. Most of them were quite a bit younger or quite a bit older than me. So there just wasn't like really any peer group for me to get involved with. And then outside of that homeschool co-op, I lived on a mountaintop in the middle of nowhere. I personally had no vehicle until I was about 19 years old, so there wasn't really any way to get out and like see other people. And that was a time that I felt was extremely isolating and lonely for me. I struggled with my schooling because I had kind of like in my teen years hit a point in my education where my mom was not quite as equipped to be able to teach me. My mother is a fantastic writer and editor, so I feel like I came out of homeschooling with pretty good like writing skills and reading skills, but I could barely add. Like my math was so horrible. And then they like threw me into an ACT test when I was in later teen years, and I just like completely bombed it. I had the worst score because my math was just like not there. And so that was really hard on my self-esteem because I knew I was not good at math, and I knew a lot of the careers I was kind of interested in did require pretty good math skills. So a little bit later in my teen years, like around 16 or 17, I asked my dad if I could go to a high school. I was like, I'm really not learning this stuff well on my own. I really feel like I need class. I need like some kind of support. And to be fair, to this day, I don't really know if that would have solved my problems at that point. But pretty much my dad just shut it down, and he was like, no. He seemed to have this concept of me going to high school and like immediately getting pregnant. I'm not even sure where that came from. I didn't really think I was that flighty of a teenager, but whatever. He just had like a very negative perspective. So I kind of limped through my teen years. I like graduated high school. I think my mom fudged a lot of my grades to get me to like pass my classes. I made an okay score on like the one standardized test I had to take in my teen years, which was required for us to like continue homeschooling. Every once in a while you had to do like a standardized test and submit that to the state, and I did well enough that they didn't like investigate our education further. When I finally graduated homeschool, it was still several years before I found a way to get out of South Dakota basically and kind of went out to find my place in the world. And I actually didn't start college until my mid-20s after I had met my then boyfriend, now husband, who really encouraged me and told me he felt like I was smart enough to pick that stuff up. My first year in college was so stressful because I had to start with like the bare minimum like remedial math class, and I just barely passed it. I was in the like tutoring lab every day, like begging for help and crying over like algebra, like basic algebra. It's kind of funny because now I'm actually pretty good at it, but it took a lot of work and it was very stressful. So that's kind of like my story, just in the sense of like me being homeschooled. So I've kind of like said some of the impacts that I feel like that lifestyle had on me, but biggest concerns I always have when anyone's ever talking about being homeschooled is, number one, being so isolated. Like, my question for any homeschool parent is always going to be, how are you going to combat that? You need like a long-term plan for how your kid is going to get to meet other people. And it's not just because as children we need peers to be able to develop appropriately, which is true. Development in childhood is very dependent on interaction with peers, which a lot of homeschool parents either don't know or kind of don't care about. Not only that though, but I think just being able to rub shoulders with different types of people helps you learn, and it helps you grow as an individual. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to completely abandon all of the values that your family has taught you. It just teaches you like, why do I hold these values, and how am I going to stick to them if those are values that I want to continue? Like, I had none of that until I like was in my 20s and wandering around in the world being like, I don't even know really why I believe this. I've never had to think about it because I've never interacted with someone who didn't hold those beliefs that my parents did. So important for childhood development. It's important for just learning your place in the world and learning what things you value the most. And the other concern I always have with like the homeschool community is because it is so isolating for children, I do worry a lot about like the potential for abuse. I was fortunate in that my parents were not particularly abusive physically or mentally. They had their moments. No parent is perfect, and I'm never gonna like diss them for that. But I have known a lot of homeschool children who were just kind of trapped in this like constant cycle of physical, emotional, even sexual abuse, and there were no other adults that had eyes on them. There was no one for them to go to if they needed help, or if they needed to talk about like, hey, is this normal? Should I be experiencing these things? So just that like isolating your child from the rest of the world in itself, I think, like sets the stage for abuse. And it doesn't matter if you as a parent are an abusive parent by nature. If you're doing something wrong, there's gonna be no feedback. Your kid's just gonna suffer until they can crawl out from under you and run away. Which is a little bit what I did. Although, like I said, my parents were not particularly abusive, other than just like the isolation bit of it. So yeah, some concerns with the whole homeschooling thing. As I kind of wrap up this video, I just have a couple final thoughts. If you are a current homeschool kid, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How has that experience been for you? Do you feel like you've got a good social support group? Do you feel isolated? If you do feel isolated, I just want you to know that you aren't alone, although it feels like it right now. I got out and I've got like a thriving friend group now. I'm married. I live far away from that little isolated house on a hill that my parents tried to raise me in, and I'm a lot happier now than I was then. So there is hope, but it does take some work to kind of get out of those situations. And maybe in the future I'll talk a little bit more about like how I exited that community and found my own way in the world. But hang in there if you are a homeschool kid who's kind of going through it right now. I'll try to link some resources in the description below that you can reach out to if you feel like you are facing a level of abuse, or if you are struggling mentally, emotionally, and not getting the support you need from your parents, because I do think it is important for everyone to know that there is support out there. You don't have to like live in this very sad, depressed, tiny community. There are ways to get out, and there are ways to get help. So I'll try to throw some things down in the description that might be helpful for some of you. And on the flip side, if you are a homeschooler who loves your experience, I'd like to hear like what it is that you enjoy about it, and what do you think your family or your whoever's homeschooling you primarily, what do you think they did differently that made it a positive experience for you? So I always like to hear other people's stories, and with me putting my little bit of a story out there, I just kind of hope to encourage you guys that yeah, no one's really alone, and you can move forward in life, and you can explore, and you can be your own person. Just sometimes for those of us who've been homeschooled, it takes a little bit more effort to get out and to find our way, but you can do it. I believe in you. Yeah, if you guys like this video, let me know in the chat, hit that like button, subscribe. If there are other topics you think you'd like to hear from me, let me know in the chat. I'm kind of just starting out this channel, not quite sure where it's going to go yet, but I love the feedback. Otherwise, as we are signing off, I hope you all have a great week. We'll see you next time.